The Boeing 737 sliced through the night sky at 37,000 feet, its passengers lost in the gentle hum of routine commercial travel. Flight 447 from Denver to Miami carried the usual collection of business travelers, vacationing families, and weary souls seeking rest above the clouds. In row 22, seat C, Major Alina Ghost Vasquez had finally found the sleep that had eluded her for months. Her worn leather jacket, draped carefully over the seat back, bore no visible insignia. The small woman curled against the window looked like any other passenger, perhaps a teacher heading home or a marketing executive catching up on rest. Nothing about her suggested the hands that gripped a sniper rifle with surgical precision, or the eyes that could spot movement at 2,000 meters. The first sign of trouble came as a whisper through the aircraft's intercom system. Captain Mitchell's voice, usually smooth and reassuring, carried an edge that made several passengers glance up from their phones and magazines. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation systems. We may need to make an unscheduled landing. But Alina's trained ear caught something else, the subtle tremor that spoke of fear, not mechanical failure. Her eyes snapped open, instantly alert. 20 years in special operations had taught her to recognize the difference between routine turbulence and genuine danger. The aircraft banked sharply to the left, far more aggressively than any commercial maneuver should warrant. Coffee cups slid across tray tables. A child began crying 3 rows ahead. Alina's hand instinctively moved to her hip, where her sidearm should have been. Airport security had seen to that particular absence. Then came the announcement that would change everything. "This is Captain Mitchell. I need to ask an unusual question, and I need an honest answer." The intercom crackled with static, but his words carried clearly through the cabin. "Is there a Delta Force sniper currently on board this aircraft?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle. Passengers exchanged confused glances, some laughing nervously at what they assumed was either a joke or a case of mistaken identity. A businessman in first class actually raised his hand mockingly, earning chuckles from nearby travelers. Alina remained perfectly still, her mind racing through possibilities. Commercial pilots didn't ask such questions unless the situation had moved far beyond technical difficulties. Her fingers traced the edge of her jacket pocket, where her military ID remained hidden. Whatever was happening in that cockpit, Captain Mitchell wasn't dealing with navigation problems. The aircraft shuddered again, this time accompanied by the subtle change in engine pitch that indicated an altitude adjustment. They were descending, and not according to any flight plan she could imagine. The sleeping passenger in row 22 was about to wake up completely. Captain Mitchell's voice returned, more urgent now. "I repeat, if there is military personnel with specialized combat training on this flight, please identify yourself immediately. We have a situation that requires unique expertise." Alina closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 20 years of service pressing against her shoulders. She had been flying home from her father's funeral, seeking nothing more than anonymous grief and the comfort of commercial aviation's predictable routine. Instead, she found herself once again being called to duty. The woman they called Ghost began to stir. "Flight attendants, please prepare for emergency protocols," Mitchell continued, his voice now broadcasting the controlled panic of a man facing circumstances beyond his training. "We may need to deviate significantly from our planned route." Alina unbuckled her seatbelt with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to rapid deployment. Around her, passengers remained largely oblivious to the gravity building and the captain's increasingly strained announcements. A few business travelers continued typing on laptops. Teenagers maintained focus on their phones. The elderly woman beside her continued knitting, needles clicking in gentle rhythm. But Alina heard what others missed, the subtle background noise suggesting radio communications, the barely perceptible change in cabin pressure indicating they were now flying at a significantly different altitude than announced. And most tellingly, the brief squelch of what sounded suspiciously like military radio traffic bleeding through the intercom system. She stood slowly, her compact frame moving with the fluid precision of someone comfortable in confined spaces and emergency situations. The flight attendant nearest her section, a young man with nervous eyes, noticed her movement immediately. "Ma'am, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seat." Alina looked at him with the steady gaze that had once made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. "I need to speak with your captain." The flight attendant's training told him to insist on passenger compliance. His instincts, however, recognized something in Alina's tone that suggested arguing would be inadvisable. I'll check with the cockpit." "You do that," Alina said quietly, "and tell Captain Mitchell that Ghost is awake." The radio crackled to life again, this time with a transmission that made Alina's blood run cold. The frequency was wrong for commercial aviation, and the voice carried the clipped precision of military communications under duress. "Falcon 47, be advised we have multiple bogies closing on your position. Repeat, multiple hostile aircraft approaching your coordinates. You are now considered a priority target." Through the small passenger window, Alina caught a glimpse of navigation lights in the distance, lights that were maintaining formation and keeping pace with their commercial aircraft. Whatever Captain Mitchell had stumbled into, it was no longer a civilian matter. The sleeping passenger in row 22 was fully awake now, and Major Alina "Ghost" Vasquez was about to go back to work. The flight attendant returned, his face pale beneath the cabin's artificial lighting. The captain wants to know if you're really military." Alina reached into her jacket and withdrew her identification, the leather folder worn smooth from years of presentations to suspicious customs officials and curious checkpoint personnel. "Major Alina Vasquez, United States Army Special Operations, and your captain is about to need every bit of training I can provide." The young man's hands trembled slightly as he examined her credentials. Around them, passengers began to notice the prolonged conversation, the unusual tension radiating from the flight crew, and the increasingly frequent announcements from the cockpit. "The captain says, he says to come forward immediately." Alina nodded and began moving toward the front of the aircraft, her mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments. Whatever situation Captain Mitchell faced, it required specific skills that no civilian pilot possessed, skills that she had spent 2 decades perfecting in some of the world's most dangerous environments. Behind her, passengers watched with growing curiosity as the small woman who had been sleeping peacefully moments before walked toward the cockpit with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command. A few began whispering among themselves, wondering what could possibly require military consultation on a routine commercial flight. Alina didn't look back. Her focus was entirely forward now, toward the cockpit where Captain Mitchell waited with answers that would likely change the trajectory of everyone's evening, and possibly their lives. The aircraft continued its unexplained descent through the night sky, surrounded by navigation lights that had no business being there. The cockpit door opened before Alina reached it, revealing Captain Mitchell, a man in his 50s with the weathered hands of someone who had been flying for decades. His eyes carried the particular strain of a pilot facing circumstances beyond any training manual. "Major Vasquez." His voice held equal measures of relief and apprehension. "That's correct." Alina stepped into the confined space of the cockpit, immediately assessing the instrument panels, radio equipment, and the controlled chaos of emergency protocols in progress. "What's our situation, Captain?" First Officer Rebecca Chen, a woman Alina's age with Asian features and an expression of barely contained professional anxiety, looked up from her console. "We've been ordered to divert to an unspecified location by aircraft claiming to be Air Force interceptors. They're maintaining radio silence except for navigation instructions." Alina moved to the side window and peered out at the formation of lights maintaining precise distance from their aircraft. Even in the darkness, her trained eye could make out the distinctive silhouettes of F-16 Fighting Falcons, but something was wrong with their markings. "How long have they been escorting us?" she asked. "Approximately 15 minutes," Mitchell replied. "They appeared shortly after we reported a minor electrical issue to Denver Control. That's when communications became complicated." Alina studied the radio equipment. "Show me exactly what happened." Chen activated the recorded communications log. Alina listened to the exchange between Flight 447 and what should have been routine air traffic control. But the responses carried subtle accent variations and protocol deviations that made her jaw tighten. "Captain, those aren't Air Force interceptors, and that wasn't Denver Control." The two pilots exchanged glances. Mitchell's hands gripped the yoke more tightly. "Then what are we dealing with?" Alina continued studying the escort formation, her mind processing possibilities with the rapid-fire analysis that had made her one of the Army's most effective reconnaissance specialists. Someone with access to military aircraft and sophisticated radio equipment has hijacked your flight path. They're herding us toward a destination that isn't on any official flight plan. "Herding us toward what?" Chen asked. Before Alina could respond, the radio crackled with a new transmission, this time in a voice that carried no pretense of American military authority. "Flight 447, you will continue on present heading. Any deviation will result in immediate consequences. Acknowledge." Alina reached for the radio microphone, but Mitchell caught her wrist. "Major, if they realize we have military personnel aboard." "They already know," Alina said grimly. "The question they asked about Delta Force wasn't random, it was confirmation. Someone wanted to verify exactly who they'd caught in their net." The aircraft shuddered slightly as the escort formation moved closer, close enough that Alina could see details she wished she couldn't. Non-standard weaponry mounted beneath the wings, radar equipment that didn't match conventional F-16 configurations, and most disturbing of all, insignia that belonged to no nation she recognized. "Where are they taking us?" Mitchell asked. Alina checked their heading against the navigation display, cross-referencing with her mental map of airfields capable of handling a Boeing 737, somewhere that doesn't officially exist. The radio transmission came again, more insistent. "Flight 447, acknowledge new instructions immediately." Alina looked at Captain Mitchell with the steady gaze of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under pressure. "Captain, I need you to understand something. Whatever's waiting for us at our destination, it's not going to end with everyone walking away. These people have gone to extraordinary lengths to acquire a specific package, and I believe that package is me." Chen's face paled. "You think this is about you specifically?" "I think someone has invested significant resources in a very sophisticated operation to acquire a particular set of skills. The question about Delta Force wasn't general reconnaissance, it was target confirmation." Mitchell stared at her with growing comprehension. "You're saying they orchestrated this entire situation to capture you?" Alina nodded grimly. "Captain, I need to know, how much fuel do we have, and how far are you willing to trust a woman you met 5 minutes ago?" The formation of escort aircraft maintained its precise geometry around Flight 447, their pilots undoubtedly monitoring every radio frequency and navigation adjustment. Whatever organization had planned this operation, they had anticipated multiple contingencies. But they hadn't anticipated Ghost. Alina studied the instrument panel with the focused intensity of someone whose survival had often depended on understanding complex systems under extreme pressure. Captain, I need you to prepare for emergency maneuvers that aren't in any commercial aviation manual. Major, I have 137 passengers aboard this aircraft. And if we continue on our present course, those passengers are going to become leverage in a situation none of us will survive. Alina's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced impossible odds before. The people orchestrating this operation have already demonstrated their willingness to compromise civilian aircraft. They're not planning a negotiation, they're planning an acquisition. Chen checked her instruments nervously. What kind of maneuvers are you talking about? Alina moved to the navigation console, her fingers tracing potential flight paths with the precision of someone accustomed to tactical planning. How well do you know the terrain between here and the Mexican border? Mitchell's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Major, are you suggesting we attempt to evade military aircraft in a commercial airliner? I'm suggesting we refuse to deliver ourselves and 137 innocent people to an organization willing to hijack commercial flights to acquire specific personnel. Alina's tone remained steady, but her eyes held the hard glint of someone preparing for combat. The question is whether you trust civilian authorities to resolve this situation, or whether you trust 20 years of special operations experience. The radio crackled again, this time with barely contained impatience. Flight 447, you have 60 seconds to acknowledge new instructions or face immediate consequences. Alina looked at both pilots with the measured calm of someone accustomed to operating in the space between impossible and inevitable. Gentlemen, welcome to asymmetric warfare. Outside the cockpit windows, the escort formation tightened perceptibly, their weapons systems clearly visible in the navigation lights. Whatever patience their captors possessed was rapidly evaporating. Captain Mitchell made the decision that would define the next several hours of their lives. What do you need me to do? Alina smiled grimly and reached for the radio microphone. First, we're going to let them know that Ghost doesn't surrender quietly. She keyed the transmission and spoke with the controlled authority of someone accustomed to addressing hostile forces. Unknown aircraft maintaining escort formation around Flight 447. Be advised you are engaging United States military personnel. Recommend you reconsider your current course of action. The response came immediately, heavy with accent and growing anger. Flight 447, you will maintain heading and altitude. No further warnings will be given. Alina looked at Mitchell and Chen with the steady gaze of someone who had spent her career making calculated risks in impossible situations. Gentlemen, they just told us everything we need to know. They're not American military, they have limited patience, and they need us alive, which means they won't fire unless absolutely necessary. Chen stared at her with growing comprehension. You're planning to call their bluff. I'm planning to change the rules of engagement. Alina moved to the pilot's seat beside Mitchell. Captain, I need you to prepare for a diving turn that's going to test every structural limit of this aircraft. First Officer Chen, I need you to monitor our escort formation and call out any changes in their positioning. Mitchell's hands moved to the controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing aircraft in adverse conditions. Major, if you're wrong about their intentions. If I'm wrong, we were already dead. We just didn't know it yet. Alina studied the terrain display with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments. The advantage we have is that they expect civilian compliance. They've planned for a cooperative target, not an aggressive defense. The escort formation maintained its precise geometry, but Alina's trained eye caught subtle adjustments in their positioning, preparations for potential defensive maneuvers that suggested their captors were more familiar with military tactics than typical aircraft pirates. Captain, on my mark, I need you to execute the steepest diving turn this aircraft can handle without structural failure. We're going to break their formation and force them to make decisions they haven't anticipated." Mitchell nodded grimly, his hands positioned on the controls. Chen monitored the escort aircraft, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Formation maintaining position, no visible weapon system activation. Alina watched the navigation display, calculating angles and distances with the precision of someone accustomed to three-dimensional tactical planning. In approximately 30 seconds, we're going to find out exactly how committed our escorts are to keeping us intact. The radio remained silent, but the formation began to shift subtly, preparation for whatever Alina's next move might be. She looked at both pilots with the calm confidence of someone who had survived situations that killed lesser operators. "Gentlemen, welcome to Ghost Protocol." Alina's fingers moved across the navigation display with practiced efficiency, her mind calculating vectors and fuel consumption with the tactical precision that had made her legendary among special operations communities. The escort formation maintained perfect discipline, but she recognized the subtle adjustments that indicated their pilots were anticipating evasive maneuvers. "Captain, they're expecting us to run," she said quietly. "Instead, we're going to attack." Mitchell's hands tightened on the controls. "Attack, Major, we're in a commercial airliner. And they're in fighters designed for air-to-air combat, not hurting civilian aircraft." Alina studied the formation geometry with the analytical mind that had identified enemy positions across multiple theaters of operation. "Their weakness is the same as their strength. They need us intact, which limits their response options." Chen monitored the escort aircraft through her instruments, her voice tight with concentration. "Formation shifting to tighter escort positions. They're reducing our maneuvering space." Alina nodded, recognizing the tactical adjustment. "They're preparing for containment protocols. Captain, I need maximum performance from this aircraft in approximately 15 seconds." The radio crackled with a new transmission, this time carrying barely controlled anger. "Flight 447, any deviation from present course will result in forced landing procedures. Acknowledge immediately." Alina reached for the microphone, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to addressing hostile forces under extreme pressure. "Unknown aircraft. Be advised this flight is under United States military protection. Any aggressive action will be met with appropriate response." The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds, long enough for Alina to confirm that their captors had not anticipated military resistance from within the commercial aircraft. When the response came, it carried a different tone entirely. "Flight 447, identify military personnel aboard your aircraft." Alina looked at Mitchell with grim satisfaction. They just confirmed this entire operation is about acquiring specific assets. "Captain, prepare for evasive maneuvers." "Major," Mitchell said quietly, "what exactly did you do to make someone go to these lengths?" Alina studied the escort formation, her mind processing the tactical implications of aircraft positioning and weapons capabilities. 6 months ago, I was part of an operation that interdicted a weapons smuggling network. We thought we shut them down completely." Chen glanced back from her instruments, apparently not completely enough. "The network had connections we didn't fully understand at the time. Military equipment, sophisticated communications, and most importantly, detailed intelligence on special operations personnel." Alina's voice carried the weight of someone who had spent months analyzing an incomplete picture. "Someone has been planning this acquisition for a very long time." The aircraft shuddered slightly as the escort formation moved closer, close enough that Alina could see individual pilot silhouettes in the cockpit windows. Professional aviators maintaining perfect formation discipline while conducting what amounted to aerial kidnapping. "They're not random actors," she continued. This level of coordination requires significant resources and detailed intelligence, someone with access to military databases and operational records. Mitchell processed this information while monitoring his instruments. "You're saying this is state-sponsored." "I'm saying this is beyond typical criminal organization capabilities." Alina checked their heading against potential destinations within fuel range. "The question is whether we allow ourselves to be delivered to whatever's waiting at the end of this flight path." The radio transmission that followed answered that question definitively. "Flight 447, you will proceed to coordinates being transmitted now. Landing instructions will be provided upon arrival. Any deviation will result in immediate engagement of escort aircraft." Alina watched the navigation display update with coordinates that placed their destination in a remote area of northern Mexico, a location with no commercial aviation facilities and no legitimate reason for a Boeing 737 to attempt landing. She looked at both pilots with the steady gaze of someone who had spent 20 years making life-or-death decisions under impossible circumstances. "Gentlemen, those coordinates lead to a location where none of us will be walking away. The time for cooperation just ended." Mitchell stared at the navigation display, his professional training warring with the reality of their situation. "Major, if we resist and they shoot us down, then we die as free Americans instead of living as leverage in whatever operation they've planned." Alina's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had faced similar choices before. "Captain, I need to know right now, are you willing to trust 20 years of special operations experience, or do you prefer to hope for the best from people who just ordered us to an illegal landing strip?" Chen looked between them, her face reflecting the impossible nature of their choices. "What are you proposing?" Alina moved to the pilot's position, her hands indicating specific control configurations. "We break formation, force them to make decisions they haven't anticipated, and create enough chaos to reach legitimate airspace where real American military assets can provide assistance." The escort formation maintained its disciplined positioning, but Alina's trained eye caught the subtle preparation for containment maneuvers, adjustments that indicated their captors were preparing for the possibility of resistance. "On my mark," she said quietly, "we're going to find out exactly how far they're willing to go to keep us intact." Captain Mitchell made the decision that would define the survival of everyone aboard Flight 447. His hands moved to the controls with professional determination. "Tell me what you need." Alina smiled grimly and prepared to remind their captors why Ghost had earned her reputation in the most dangerous airspace on Earth. "Hold on, gentlemen. We're about to become very unpredictable." The formation of escort aircraft maintained perfect discipline, as Alina initiated the maneuvers that would either save everyone aboard Flight 447 or ensure their death came on their own terms. Ghost was awake, and she was done being herded. Alina's hands moved across the instrument panel with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years mastering complex systems under extreme pressure. "Captain, I need you to understand something about the aircraft surrounding us. They're maintaining formation discipline that indicates professional military training, but their positioning suggests they've never conducted civilian aircraft interception." Mitchell monitored his controls while processing Alina's tactical assessment. "What does that tell us?" "It tells us they're improvising this entire operation based on theoretical planning rather than practical experience." Alina studied the escort formation through the side window, her trained eye cataloging details that civilian pilots would miss. They know how to fly formation, but they don't know how to manage a non-cooperative civilian aircraft. Chen checked her instruments nervously. "The formation is adjusting again. They're moving closer." Alina nodded, recognizing the tactical error her captors were making. "They're reducing their own maneuvering space to increase their control over ours. Classic mistake when dealing with an unpredictable target. The radio crackled with increasing impatience. Flight 447, acknowledge coordinate transmission immediately. Final warning. Alina reached for the microphone, her voice carrying the controlled authority of someone accustomed to psychological operations. Unknown aircraft. Be advised we are experiencing navigation system failures that prevent compliance with unauthorized flight instructions. Recommend you contact Denver Control for legitimate landing alternatives. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Alina to confirm that their captors had not prepared for technical excuses rather than direct defiance. When the response came, it carried barely contained frustration. Flight 447, maintain present heading regardless of technical issues. Escort aircraft will provide navigation assistance. Alina looked at Mitchell with grim satisfaction. They just confirmed they're operating outside official channels. No legitimate military operation would refuse to coordinate with civilian air traffic control. Mitchell began to understand the tactical psychology Alina was employing. You're forcing them to reveal the unofficial nature of their operation. I'm forcing them to make decisions they haven't fully planned for. Alina monitored the escort formation, noting subtle changes in positioning that indicated growing uncertainty among their captors. Professional military operations have contingency plans for every scenario. Criminal operations improvise when things don't go according to the initial plan. Chen's voice carried increasing tension. Formation is spreading wider. They're giving themselves more maneuvering room. Alina recognized the tactical adjustment immediately. They're preparing for the possibility that we'll attempt evasive action. The question is whether they're prepared to use lethal force against a civilian aircraft. The aircraft shuddered slightly as one of the escort fighters moved close enough for Alina to see individual details. Weapons mounted beneath the wings, radar equipment that didn't match standard military configurations, and most tellingly, markings that had been recently applied over original identification numbers. These aircraft have been modified and remarked, she told both pilots. Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create the appearance of legitimate military authority while maintaining operational security that prevents identification. Mitchell processed this information while maintaining steady flight parameters. How do we use that against them? Alina studied the navigation display, calculating distances to legitimate airfields and potential terrain features that could provide tactical advantages. We force them to choose between completing their mission and maintaining their cover story. The radio transmission that followed provided exactly the opening Alina had been hopping for. Flight 447, you are ordered to reduce altitude to flight level 250 immediately. Failure to comply will result in mechanical assistance from escort aircraft. Alina smiled grimly and keyed the microphone. Unknown aircraft, negative on altitude change without authorization from Denver Control. Commercial aviation regulations require coordination with official air traffic management. The response came immediately, heavy with accent and barely controlled anger. Flight 447, you will comply with escort instructions regardless of civilian regulations. Alina looked at both pilots with the steady gaze of someone who had just confirmed her tactical assessment. Gentlemen, they just abandoned any pretense of legitimate authority. We now know definitively that we're dealing with a criminal organization using military equipment. Chen stared at her with growing comprehension. And that changes our options how? It means we're no longer bound by civilian aviation protocols. Alina moved to the navigation console, her fingers tracing potential flight paths with tactical precision. Captain, how familiar are you with terrain-following navigation? Mitchell's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Major, Terrain following is for military aircraft with specialized radar systems. Commercial aircraft don't have the equipment for low-altitude terrain navigation. Alina studied the topographical display with the analytical mind that had planned countless reconnaissance missions in hostile territory. Commercial aircraft don't typically have special operations personnel providing tactical guidance either. The escort formation began another adjustment, this time moving into positions that would allow them to force Flight 447 into a descent whether the crew cooperated or not. Alina recognized the tactical preparation immediately. They're positioning for forced compliance. In approximately 2 minutes, they're going to make physical contact with our aircraft to force altitude changes. She looked at Mitchell with the calm confidence of someone who had spent her career operating in the space between impossible and inevitable. "Captain, we can continue following their instructions and hope they allow everyone to survive whatever they have planned, or we can take control of this situation and force them to react to our initiative." Mitchell stared at the controls, his professional training warring with the reality of their impossible circumstances. "What exactly are you proposing?" Alina moved to the pilot's seat, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command in extreme situations. "I'm proposing we remind them that Ghost doesn't surrender without a fight." The escort formation completed its tactical positioning, weapon systems clearly visible in the artificial lighting. Whatever patience their captors had possessed was rapidly evaporating. Alina looked at both pilots with the measured calm of someone about to initiate combat operations. "Gentlemen, in 30 seconds we're going to find out whether they need us alive badly enough to follow us through terrain that will test every limit of their flying skills." She smiled grimly and prepared to demonstrate why 20 years of special operations experience trumped theoretical planning every time. "Hold on. This is about to become very interesting." The radio crackled one final time before Alina implemented the maneuvers that would either save everyone aboard Flight 447 or ensure their death came on their own terms. "Flight 447, final warning. Comply immediately or face consequences." Alina keyed the microphone and spoke with the cold authority of someone who had spent decades addressing hostile forces. "Unknown aircraft. This is Major Alina Vasquez, United States Army Special Operations. Be advised you are now engaging American military personnel in what constitutes an act of war. Recommend you reconsider your current course of action." The silence that followed confirmed everything Alina needed to know about their captor's commitment to completing their mission, regardless of escalation. She looked at Captain Mitchell with the steady gaze of someone about to change the rules of engagement entirely. "Captain, execute emergency descent now." Flight 447 began the maneuvers that would either demonstrate the superiority of special operations tactical thinking or provide a definitive end to Alina's distinguished military career. Either way, Ghost was done being herded. Alina's hands guided Captain Mitchell through the emergency descent with the precise authority of someone who had coordinated countless tactical operations under extreme pressure. The Boeing 737 dropped through the night sky at angles that pushed every structural limit of commercial aviation design. "Maintain descent rate," Alina commanded, her voice steady despite the aircraft's violent shuddering. "They can't match our descent profile without risking structural damage to their fighters." Through the cockpit windows, the escort formation scrambled to adjust their positioning. Alina's tactical gamble was working. The fighter aircraft designed for high-altitude interception were struggling to maintain formation control during the aggressive descent maneuvers. Chen monitored their altitude with growing alarm. "We're descending through 15,000 feet. Major, commercial aircraft aren't designed for these descent rates. Neither are fighters conducting close formation escort operations." Alina replied, studying the scattered positioning of their former captors. They're having to choose between maintaining visual contact and avoiding collision with terrain. The radio crackled with frustrated transmissions as the escort aircraft attempted to coordinate their response to Alina's tactical initiative. Flight 447, immediate cessation of descent maneuvers, or we will engage. Alina keyed the microphone with grim satisfaction. Unknown aircraft, be advised you are now attempting to threaten American military personnel over United States airspace. Suggest you reconsider your tactical position. Mitchell struggled to maintain aircraft control during the continued descent. Major, we can't maintain this descent rate much longer without risking structural failure. Alina studied the terrain display, calculating distances and navigational options with the rapid-fire analysis that had made her legendary among special operations communities. Captain, in approximately 90 seconds, we're going to level off at terrain-following altitude and execute navigation procedures that will require every bit of flying skill you possess. The escort formation had spread significantly during the emergency descent, their pilots struggling to maintain tactical positioning while avoiding collision with the rapidly descending commercial aircraft. Alina's gamble was succeeding. She had forced trained military aviators to abandon their disciplined formation and react defensively to her initiative. Formation is scattered, Chen reported, her voice tight with concentration. 3 aircraft maintaining visual contact. One appears to have lost formation entirely. Alina nodded, recognizing the tactical breakdown she had anticipated. They trained for cooperative target management, not aggressive evasion. The more unpredictable we become, the more their coordination deteriorates. The radio transmission that followed confirmed Alina's assessment of their captors' growing desperation. Flight 447, you are ordered to level off immediately and return to assigned altitude. Failure to comply will result in weapons engagement. Alina looked at Mitchell with the calm confidence of someone who had spent 20 years calling similar bluffs under more dangerous circumstances. Captain, they just confirmed they need us alive. If they were willing to shoot us down, they would have done it already. Mitchell's hands worked the controls with professional determination, managing the aircraft's aggressive descent while processing Alina's tactical psychology. You're betting our lives on their need to capture rather than destroy. I'm betting our lives on 20 years of experience reading hostile intentions under extreme pressure. Alina studied the remaining escort aircraft, noting the increasingly desperate nature of their positioning adjustments. They've invested too much in this operation to settle for killing us when they need us alive. The aircraft continued its aggressive descent through 10,000 feet, the escort formation struggling to maintain any semblance of tactical coordination. Alina's strategy was working. By forcing rapid tactical adjustments, she had disrupted the careful planning that had made the initial interception possible. Chen monitored their instruments with growing anxiety. Major, we're approaching terrain-following altitude without terrain-following radar systems. Alina moved to the navigation console, her fingers tracing topographical features with the precision of someone who had navigated hostile territory using nothing but map coordinates and tactical instinct. First officer, commercial aircraft don't typically have special operations personnel providing navigation guidance either. The radio crackled again, this time with barely controlled panic. Flight 447, immediate compliance required. You are approaching terrain that cannot be safely navigated at current altitude. Alina smiled grimly and keyed the microphone. Unknown aircraft. Be advised current navigation is being conducted by United States military personnel with extensive terrain following experience. Recommend you maintain safe distance to avoid collision. She looked at Mitchell with the steady gaze of someone about to demonstrate capabilities that existed far outside civilian aviation training. "Captain, welcome to Special Operations Navigation. We're about to show them exactly why Ghost earned her reputation." The remaining escort aircraft struggled to maintain visual contact as Flight 447 continued its descent toward terrain features that would test every limit of both aircraft and pilot capabilities. Alina prepared to implement navigation procedures that would either validate 20 years of special operations training or provide a definitive demonstration of the consequences of underestimating American military personnel. "Hold on, gentlemen," she said quietly. "We're about to remind them why capturing Ghost was always going to be more complicated than they anticipated." The aircraft leveled off at an altitude that placed mountain peaks uncomfortably close to their wings, and Alina began the terrain-following procedures that would either save everyone aboard Flight 447 or ensure their death came while fighting back. Ghost was no longer running. She was leading her captors into terrain they couldn't navigate and tactical situations they couldn't control. The real demonstration of special operations capabilities was about to begin. Alina guided Flight 447 through canyon passages that pushed every limit of commercial aviation capabilities, her hands steady on the navigation controls, while Captain Mitchell fought to maintain aircraft stability in terrain designed to challenge military pilots with specialized training. "Maintain heading 270, Alina commanded, her voice calm despite the mountain peaks flashing past their wingtips. "We're following a navigation corridor that requires precision these aircraft can't match." The escort formation had abandoned any attempt at close formation discipline, their pilots struggling to maintain visual contact while avoiding collision with terrain features that appeared with terrifying suddenness in their forward vision. Alina's tactical gamble was succeeding beyond her most optimistic projections. Chen monitored their instruments with professional determination despite circumstances far beyond any civilian aviation training. Remaining escort aircraft are falling back. They can't maintain formation at this altitude. Alina studied the terrain display, recognizing geographical features from reconnaissance missions conducted years earlier in this same region. They're discovering that theoretical knowledge of an area doesn't replace practical navigation experience. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate transmissions as the escort aircraft attempted to coordinate their response to Alina's terrain-following tactics. "Flight 447, you are ordered to gain altitude immediately. Current flight path is not sustainable." Alina keyed the microphone with grim satisfaction. "Unknown aircraft. Current flight path is being navigated by personnel with extensive experience in this terrain. Suggest you maintain safe distance to avoid controlled flight into terrain." Mitchell's hands worked the controls with remarkable skill, managing the commercial aircraft through navigation challenges that would have tested military pilots with specialized equipment. "Major, how long can we maintain this flight profile?" Alina calculated fuel consumption against distance to legitimate airfields, her mind processing multiple variables with the tactical precision that had kept her alive through